The gavel slammed against the wooden bench, but the tension in the room had already reached its peak. "Mr. Carter, you stand accused of impersonating a federal agent and obstructing justice. What do you have to say for yourself?" Judge Calloway's voice dripped with disdain. His piercing gaze locked onto the man before him. The defendant, a well-dressed black man in his 40s, stood tall, unshaken, unreadable. His deep brown eyes flickered with something unspoken, something powerful. The whispers in the gallery swelled. Everyone was waiting for his response, for the moment he would crumble under the weight of the accusation. But Carter didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket. Instantly, officers tensed, hands creeping toward their holsters. The room fell deathly silent. And then, he pulled out the one thing that would turn this entire case upside down. What happened next? No one in that courtroom saw coming. Marcus Carter wasn't just another defendant standing before a biased judge. He was a man who had spent his entire life fighting for justice. But today, justice had turned its back on him. The officers who arrested him hadn't listened. They saw a black man in an expensive suit standing outside a federal building and assumed the worst. Loitering, they called it. When he tried to explain, they dismissed his words as lies. When he reached for his ID, they slammed him against the hood of a police car. Now, standing in this dimly lit courtroom, Carter faced something far more insidious than handcuffs: prejudice, systemic bias, a judge who had already decided his fate before the trial had even begun. Judge Calloway barely glanced at the case file. "Men like you think they can outsmart the system," he sneered, his fingers tapping against the bench. The gallery murmured, shifting uneasily. Even the prosecutor hesitated. Carter took a slow breath. He had seen this before, countless times. But today, he wasn't just going to defend himself. He was going to expose the truth. And once he did, this courtroom, this judge, and this entire system would never be the same again. Judge Calloway leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Let me save you some time," he said coldly. "You're guilty." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. The prosecutor shifted in his seat. The gallery exchanged wary glances. Even the officers who had arrested Carter looked uncertain now, but the judge wasn't finished. "I've seen your kind before," he continued, his voice dripping with quiet contempt. "Always thinking you can manipulate the system. But not in my courtroom." Carter clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the edges of his suit. He had spent years in courtrooms like this, watching men like Calloway decide fates without a second thought. But this time, the system had chosen the wrong man. He scanned the faces around him. Some were eager for a conviction. Others, especially those who knew the judge's history, were beginning to sense something was off. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor, perhaps we should—" Calloway silenced him with a glare. "We will not waste this court's time." He turned back to Carter. "You are nothing more than a fraud." The moment had arrived. Carter reached into his suit pocket. A ripple of tension shot through the room. Officers stiffened, hands hovering over their holsters. No one was ready for what happened next. The air in the courtroom was razor-thin. Officers tensed, their hands inching toward their holsters. Calloway's eyes narrowed. Carter moved slowly, deliberately. "Relax," he said, his voice even, unwavering. He pulled out a sleek black leather wallet and flipped it open. The courtroom erupted into gasps. Under the harsh, fluorescent lights, the emblem of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed like a dagger in the dark. Beneath it, bold capital letters spelled out his full title: Director Marcus Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Judge Calloway froze. His lips parted slightly, his complexion draining from red-hot arrogance to ghostly white. The prosecutor's jaw hung open. The officers exchanged stunned glances. The man they had accused of fraud was the highest-ranking official in the FBI. Carter took a single step forward, locking eyes with the judge. "I don't need to impersonate anyone, Your Honor." His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that pressed down on every person in the room. "But it seems the only fraud here is the assumption that a man like me couldn't hold power." Calloway's fingers gripped the bench. His career, his entire reputation was crumbling in real time. For a long, heavy moment, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Then, chaos. Reporters scrambled for their phones, cameras flashing like a lightning storm. "Did you see that?" one whispered, his fingers flying across his keyboard. FBI director, not a fraud, but the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. The prosecutor fumbled with his papers, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Your Honor," he stammered, his confidence shattered. "Given these, revelations, I'd recommend an immediate dismissal of all charges." Judge Calloway didn't respond. He couldn't. His hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses, his mind racing. This can't be happening. Carter simply stood there, his presence alone forcing the world to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. Outside the courthouse, the story was already spreading like wildfire. Social media exploded. Racist judge exposed. FBI director humiliated in his own courtroom. Networks cut into live coverage. Legal analysts debated what would come next. But the real damage was just beginning, because this wasn't just about one case. This was about every case Calloway had ever ruled on. And now, every single one of them was about to be put under a microscope. The fallout was immediate. By the time Judge Calloway left the courtroom, his name was already trending nationwide. "Judge exposed for racial bias. FBI director humiliated in court." News outlets replayed the moment on loop, Carter's badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, the look of sheer panic on Calloway's face. But this wasn't just about Calloway anymore. Within hours, civil rights groups demanded an independent review of every case the judge had ever ruled on. Legal analysts combed through past convictions, finding disturbing patterns, harsh sentences, wrongful convictions, and clear racial disparities. The Department of Justice launched an official probe. Calls for judicial reform gained momentum. Protests erupted outside the courthouse. Justice for the wrongfully convicted. Then, the real bombshell dropped. A leaked internal memo revealed that Calloway wasn't alone. Other judges, prosecutors, and officers were implicated in a far-reaching system of judicial misconduct. Carter's phone buzzed. A new report in his inbox. As he scanned the names on the list, his jaw tightened. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The courtroom scandal had sent shockwaves across the country, but deep down, Carter knew. This was just the tip of the iceberg. The leaked memo was damning, yet it barely scratched the surface of what was really going on behind closed doors. How many innocent people had their lives ruined? How deep did this corruption run? As reporters swarmed Judge Calloway outside the courthouse, firing questions he couldn't answer, Carter's mind was already elsewhere. His instincts told him there was more, much more. Then his phone vibrated. A new message, no sender, no number, just a single line of text. "You exposed one judge. Are you ready for the rest?" Carter's pulse quickened. His eyes darted around the street, scanning the faces in the crowd. Who sent this? How much did they know? This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Do you think Carter should dig deeper? What would you do in his place? Comment below.